right? Don't they look magnificent? Good God. Okay, so hi, thank you so much for allowing us to spend the last couple of days with you. It's been such a privilege. I really can't tell you. So the reason I'm standing here in front of you is because I'm famous for probably two things. I'm famous because I'm one of the founding trustees of Click, but also I'm famous because I am still sort of the first black woman to run a bank in South Africa. But not the real story. The actual story is that my sister is the first female Auditor General of South Africa, and there's a real story coming. And my younger sister is the CEO of a marketing consultancy business. Now, that story should tell you that what I have achieved, depending on how you look at it, is not actually about me, right? It's about how we raise our children. It's about how changing little lives really does have big impact. Because I can tell you now, my older sister as AG is having a lot of impact, and I feel like those are the kind of people you guys are creating right now. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where it all started. Where it all started. So I know a lot of you are from Gauteng. So I was born in Soshanguve many moons ago. And I'm the middle child. Are there any middle children in the room? Woo woo! Now, when you're a middle child, you never feel quite loved. You're always the one who feels sorry for yourself, and you have to work so hard for attention, right? That's totally me. So I'm a little bit of an attention seeker, so bear with me as I go through this. But one of the things that was awesome though about growing up where I did is that I had two parents who both had degrees. So they met at Philip University, which is the University of Limpopo. And my mom's a teacher, and my dad is a lawyer. And they both had a love for reading. So our house is always full of books, And they made it their business to make sure that we always read. So committed were they to this education story that we started school when we were 4 years old. So at 4 years old, off we went to school. And school was not great. The other kids were mean, but that's life, right? And when we were 8 years old, my parents decided to take us out of St. Andrew, out of the school we were at. So the school we were at was a township school in Soshanguve. And you guys are probably too young to know this or to remember it, but in the 1980s, late 80s, the townships were really on fire, right? So my school days, in that last year that I was there, looked like this. We knew that at least once a month, there would be a police Casper, these big police cars, that were gonna arrive. Right? And you would hear it with like this this rumbling of these big trucks that would come towards the school. And they would arrive, all these soldiers would jump out with big guns and dogs and tear gas. And you knew they were there because you hear these kids screaming, leaving class, trying to run home, right? Trying to run for safety. So if this happens every month, you can imagine what happens in the kid's mind, right? You kind of go to school feeling quite scared because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if this is going to be the day or if it's going to be tomorrow. So you spend class sitting at the edge of your seat, waiting for that rumbling, waiting for the other kids to start screaming so you could run. So we were very lucky. My parents managed to take us out of that school and put us into St. Andrew's School, which is a private school for girls in Joburg. Hence my very fancy English accent, which you might have noticed. So we went to St. Andrews, and the point about St. Andrews is that my older sister and I, I was 9, she was 11, we had to repeat 2 years of school when we got there. So just as well, we started when we were 4 years old, otherwise it would have been very awkward for us. But we had to repeat 2 years of school. But not only that, right? When all the other kids would go to school from 8 until, say, 1:30, 2 p.m., we had to start remedial classes from 2 until 5. So for the first 3 years, that was our lives, right? If you think about what that means in terms of a kid who doesn't get a good education or go to a good school from the beginning, there's a lot of catching up you have to do later on in life. So you really need to think about what Click does in that context as well. But also what was really cool about St. Andrews, and actually my favorite memory, was discovering the library. I had never seen so many rooms with so many books in my entire life. I was so excited. So every time I had a spare moment, I would run to the library, I would pick out a book, and I would sit on the floor and I would just get lost in this world of reading. And for me, that's when I discovered that actually when things are seeming pretty bad, find a book and you can escape into it. I finished St. Andrews after many, many long years. High school sex, some of you might remember. Kids are mean, once again. And I went to UCT where I studied accounting, which I hated. Then I studied law, which I loved. Then I worked as a lawyer, which I hated. Then I became a banker, which I loved because I met Nicola and I met Arlene and I met Leila. R&B was amazing. But one of the most awesome things about R&B is we had, well, some of us had the greatest boss. I had Herman Bossman as my boss. I'm not sure that these guys did, but I had Herman. And Herman was the best. And Herman would say to us, listen, if you guys are going to stay in my team, you better get to reading. I want to know that you are reading the Business Day every day. And I want to know that you're reading the Financial Mail and the Fin Week every weekend. And he would test us, right? Monday mornings, 7:30, we would have meetings to talk about what was happening in the news. So every weekend, my father would find me sitting with the Fin Week. Fin Week is so boring, guys. And the Financial Mail, right? That was my life. And at some point, my father comes up to me and he's like, V, I understand that you love reading this stuff, and well, I would pretend I loved it. I can see that you think this is important, but if you don't figure out what's actually happening in society, you're never going to be a good executive. This was a man who, from when I was very small, would come home with 5 different newspapers. It would be the Star, the Sowetan, the Citizen, the Business Day, and whatever else was going, right? Because in his view, to be able to be successful, you had to read very, very widely and understand lots of different things to make an impact in society. And he was actually very good at that. But to kind of carry on that story and to bring it back to banking, after I left R&B, I went to F&B. And at F&B, Michael Duran was CEO. Do you guys know Michael?
Yeah.
You know Michael, right? So he's the guy who made F&B into the most innovative bank in the world, right, or in the country. So Michael at the time did a lot of talks about what innovation was. And I remember him saying over and over and over that innovation is about knowing a little bit about a lot of things, right? And the only way you can know a little bit about a lot of things is by, say it with me, is by reading. So again, and he's right. Even in my own job now, I know that if I spend lots of time with you guys, I'm going to learn a lot about what I want to do when I go back to the office, right? What's going to be different about how I think about my business and what I do every day because of this experience. So you really must know a lot about a lot of different things, or a little bit about a lot. Then I left F&B and I went to business school in the US, which was amazing. It was such a privilege to be able to study, with kids from all over the world, and to take 2 years out of my life, out of work life, to just learn and read more. But maybe the most important thing I learned during business school was that there's so much to know and so little time. And at that point in my life, I also learned that because I'm never going to know it all, the best thing I can do for me is to actually know people who know the things I don't know. And the only way to do that is by learning how to build connections, how to connect with people. And you can imagine, right, connecting with lots of different people is hard. If you don't know their background, you don't understand them, they don't understand you, there's always lots of suspicion, right? So it's actually a very hard thing to do. So when I got to African Bank and I was the CEO of African Bank, I had to lead, my team was pretty much a group of older white guys, right? And I had to now figure out how I lead this team to get them to do the things that I needed them to do so that we could be the best bank, basically. That's always the case. But what I remember about that time, because I actually did a pretty good job, I'm just going to put it out there. But maybe one of the most important things I remember about that first year was an interview I was having with somebody, and this woman says to me, Basani, the best way to become a good leader is by reading novels. So if you think about any ordinary leader, they'll tell you about all the biographies they're reading and all these very, very serious books. But the truth about novels is that, if you think of your favorite novel, you fall in love with the characters, right? Throughout the course of a novel, they build up these incredible characters. By the time you finish, you're either crying because they're dead or you want to kill them because they're horrible. But you can see them in your mind's eye, right? These characters. And that's the point about, if you read lots of novels, you have lots of characters in your mind. And you create this library of people. So every time you meet somebody who's like a character in a book you've read, it's easier to connect, right? Because you have a point of reference. So if you've read a book about Muslims, or you've read a book about people written by a Japanese author, you immediately have an idea of what this could look like. And you have a place from which to start a conversation. And for me, that was one of the most important lessons, I think, from my time at African Bank, because actually all you're doing as CEO is getting people into a room to come up with a strategy that they're going to go off and execute. And for that, you need to be very good at connecting with people. So that leads me to, I'm getting to the end, to the second last thing I want to talk about, is what I think it takes to be successful in the world we live in. And of course, it still comes back to everything that you're doing. But everything I've been reading is about learning agility. So as you know, the world is changing faster than it ever has, and it will never change as slowly as it's doing today. And the only way you're going to be able to keep up with it is if you can unlearn what you learned 2 years ago to learn something else. So think ChatGPT. So at lunch today, these very smart people that I work with were all showing off about how they've been playing with ChatGPT. And I was too embarrassed to say, I have not played with ChatGPT. I have never touched ChatGPT. But the truth of the matter is, these are the things that we have to be able to do, right? Whatever new thing comes up, you need to be brave enough, you need to make the time, and you actually got to get your mind around it. You need to adapt very, very quickly. And I think that's the one thing that I would leave with you, that figure out how to read as much as possible so you can be as agile as possible, so you can be successful and put yourself in a position to do great things in the future. And the second thing about being, about success in the world we're going into now is the beauty or the art of storytelling. So there are too many facts to remember at any given point in time. There's too many numbers. There's just too much information out there in the world. And the best way to get people to buy into what you want them to know is by telling them a story. So I'm hoping that when I'm done here, which I will be shortly, you'll remember some of the stories that I've told today, because actually that's what the human brain does, it remembers stories. So always remember that if you need to get a point across, don't give people all facts and numbers. Tell them stories. Then as I end off, I want to talk a little bit about Click. The last 2 days have reminded me just how special Click is. It's such a beautiful and amazing place, and the people that Nicola and her team have gathered, all of you here today are just doing such incredible work, and it's such an honor and a privilege to be part of it, to kind of weave into it from time to time. I saw a presentation that Dylan gave to you guys yesterday, where he talks about, if you increase literacy by 1%, I think you increase GDP by 3 billion. And if you, and the fact that illiteracy in South Africa costs us over 100 billion rand a year. And it just made me think hard about where we would be as a country today if there had been a bigger focus on it. But it also made me so hopeful for where we're going to be in 5 years' time because of the work that you guys are doing. But what I would have added to his presentation is that, when women are educated, they make better decisions. They have fewer children, they feed them better, they find them better opportunities, and as a result, contribute much more impactfully to society as a whole. Being able to be educated is such a game changer for absolutely everybody. So while Click's mission is to, help me here, Click's mission is to change little lives, which is an amazing thing, but actually it's all about growing a better South African for all of us, and making sure that whatever you guys are doing will lead to creating the next president. So I want to thank all of you for everything that you're doing, because ultimately, without you, South Africa really is not going to go, its potential is not going to be unlocked. But maybe more importantly, I've thought long and hard, or I've had to, it's really landed on me over the last couple of days, what a remarkable woman Nicola is. She's built, honestly, the most important business in education today. And it can only go from strength to strength because she's gathered the most incredible people around her to help her to achieve this amazing thing. So as I close off, I'm going to ask all of you to stand and to applaud your CEO.